What would you do if you were removed from your rightful seat? Not because of a mistake, but because of who you are. For Dr. Ayanna Brooks, a calm, brilliant black CEO traveling to a critical meeting. That moment came high above the Atlantic. She had earned her seat in business class. She had checked in early, followed every rule. Yet minutes before takeoff, a white passenger was placed where she was meant to be. Was it a misunderstanding, a hidden company policy, or something far more systemic? Something the airline never expected to be challenged. What happened next would send shockwaves from the cabin of Aurora Airways Flight 208 to the boardroom of one of the largest aviation groups in the world. In just 15 minutes, Ayanna would face a choice that could cost her career or transform the industry forever. This is not just a story about an airline. It is about dignity, quiet power, and the courage to confront injustice where it hides in plain sight. If you believe in standing up, even when your voice shakes, stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to join us on this journey. The story begins now. Dr. Ayanna Brooks stepped out of the Blacktown car into the crisp morning air at Liberty International Airport. The skyline of Newark shimmered faintly in the distance, but her mind was already 10 steps ahead. Today was about precision. She had a presentation to deliver in London that could secure the largest international investment her company had ever seen. She glanced at her watch. 3 hours to spare. Exactly as she liked it. No rushing, no unexpected surprises. Her assistants knew she lived by the philosophy that preparation was an armor no one could pierce. Inside the terminal, the bustle was a constant hum rolling suitcases, announcements echoing from unseen speakers, and the sharp scent of coffee from the cafe line that stretched halfway down the concourse. Ayanna's dark navy suit was tailored to perfection. Her natural curls swept into a smooth, elegant bun. She carried only a slim laptop case and a small leather handbag, both chosen for their simplicity and function. Aurora Airways premium check-in counters gleamed under bright lights, staffed by uniformed agents with polite smiles that didn't always reach their eyes. Ayanna approached the nearest open station, sliding her passport and business class ticket across the counter. The agent, a young white woman with a crisp bob haircut, glanced up. Her smile faltered for just a second before she gestured vaguely toward a distant area. "Economy check-in is down there, ma'am." Ayanna's tone remained calm. I'm flying business class." She tapped the ticket still sitting in front of the woman. The agent blinked, checked the ticket, then forced a quick smile. "Oh, my apologies. I'll get you processed." No apology in her voice, just the mechanical politeness of someone whose assumptions had just been challenged. It was nothing new. A subtle reminder that in certain spaces, her presence still triggered a quiet question. Do you really belong here? Minutes later, security was a blur of belts, trays, and scanning machines. She made her way to Aurora Airways Premium Lounge, a sleek glass-paneled entrance guarded by a tall man in a tailored uniform. "Business class and platinum members only," he said without glancing up from his scanner. Ayanna presented both her boarding pass and platinum card. He studied them longer than necessary. "Just doing my job. We've had people try to sneak in before." She stepped past him without comment, the faint sting of his implication still hanging in the air. Inside, the lounge was serene. Leather chairs, soft music, the faint clink of glassware from the bar. Ayanna found a quiet corner near the window, opened her laptop, and reviewed the final slides of her presentation. The numbers were solid, the strategy airtight. Her phone buzzed a message from her chief of staff in Washington. Board approved the Titan Systems acquisition. Congratulations. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. Titan's assets would make Vanguard Cyber Systems the undisputed leader in North American cybersecurity. Few outside her inner circle knew about the acquisition yet. The timing was deliberate. When the boarding announcement came, she gathered her things and walked toward Gate A-17. The boarding agent called for business-class passengers, and Ayanna stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're boarding business class now," the agent said, gesturing for her to wait as if she'd misheard. Ayanna held up her ticket. "I am business class." A quick glance at the ticket, then a curt nod. "Oh, go ahead. On board." Her seat 2A was a spacious window seat with a clear view of the tarmac. She placed her laptop bag overhead, settled in, and adjusted her seat. Around her, other passengers were being offered glasses of champagne. The flight attendant in her section, Claire Whitman, passed Ayanna twice without so much as a greeting. When Ayanna pressed the call button, Claire appeared with a thin smile. "Is there a problem I'd like the pre-departure champagne?" Ayanna said evenly. "Of course." She returned moments later, not with champagne, but a glass of orange juice. "Enjoy," Claire said, moving on without explanation. Ayanna's fingers tightened slightly around the glass. She didn't drink the juice. 15 minutes later, just as the final boarding call echoed over the intercom, a tall man in a tailored gray suit strode into the cabin. Preston Hale, even if she hadn't recognized his face from industry events. His manner announced him before he spoke brisk, assured, utterly certain the world bent to his convenience. He stopped at her row, glanced at his boarding pass, and then at her. "I believe you're in my seat." Ayanna kept her voice level. "This is 2O, my assigned seat." She held out her ticket for him to see. Preston didn't look at it. He leaned over the aisle and flagged Claire. "There's a mix-up. I always book 2A. Claire's smile warmed instantly for him in a way it never had for Ayanna. "Mr. Hale, let's get this sorted." She turned to Ayanna. "Ma'am, would you mind moving to another seat? Mr. Hale is one of our most valued frequent flyers." "My ticket is for this seat," Ayanna replied. "If there's been a double booking, the airline can find him another seat in business class." Preston's jaw tightened. "I have an important meeting right after landing. I need this seat." Claire lowered her voice, as if offering a special favor. "We can move you to economy and refund the fare difference." Ayanna studied her for a moment. "That won't be necessary," she said. "I booked this seat for a reason. I have important business in London as well." The aisle began to clog with boarding passengers. The lead flight attendant, Robert Kane, approached. "What's going on?" "This passenger is refusing to give up her seat for Mr. Hale," Claire explained. Robert turned to Ayanna. "Company policy allows us to reassign seats when necessary. What policy allows you to move a paying passenger to a different class entirely?" she asked. "It's at the discretion of the cabin crew," Robert said. His tone clipped. "There's a seat open in economy. Row 34. We need to complete boarding." Ayanna's eyes swept the cabin. Curious faces, some sympathetic, some impatient. She took out her phone. "I'll need your names and employee IDs. And I want it noted that I am moving under protest." "That won't be necessary," Robert said quickly. "Claire will help you relocate." Preston slipped into 2A before Ayanna had even stood up, murmuring, "Thanks for understanding," without looking at her. As she walked through the business cabin toward economy, Ayanna felt the familiar weight of public humiliation settle over her shoulders and the quiet heat of resolve building beneath it. Row 34 was wedged deep in the rear of the plane, where the ceiling felt lower and the air heavier. The narrow seat pressed against Ayanna's hips, and the legroom barely allowed her to place her laptop bag under the seat ahead. A man on her left immediately claimed both armrests with elbows spread wide like territorial markers. On her right, an elderly woman gave her a small, sympathetic smile, but said nothing. As Ayanna buckled her seat belt, she caught the faint scent of champagne from the front of the plane. In business class, glasses were clinking, meal menus were being handed out, and coats were being collected for storage. Here. A flight attendant briskly walked past with a bin of tangled headphones, dropping them into outstretched hands without making eye contact. The humiliation burned quietly, not because she cared about the legroom or the food she could endure discomfort for 7 hours if she had to, but because of the way it had been done. Without consideration, without respect, without even the pretense of fairness. She opened her phone and began typing in the Notes app. 1042 Mum. Removed from seat 2A by lead F.A. Robert Kane and F.A. Claire Whitman at the request of Preston Hale. Told it was company policy to reassign at crew discretion. No verification of tickets for both passengers. She paused, added the names, and then stared at the blinking cursor. Document everything. That was one of the earliest lessons she had learned in her career. Facts were power. Details were leverage. A flight attendant arrived with a cart of drinks. No introduction, no smile. She stopped at Ayanna's row and rattled off. Water, soda, juice. Do you have sparkling water? Ayanna asked. A pause. I'll check, the attendant muttered, moving on without waiting for an answer. From the corner of her eye, Ayanna saw a young black man in row 31 trying to get a flight attendant's attention. He spoke with quiet firmness. I pre-ordered a vegetarian meal when I booked my ticket. It's on my reservation. The attendant, a tall man with a tight jaw, shook his head. We don't have any vegetarian meals left. The man gestured toward his white seatmate who was unwrapping a vegetarian entree. He didn't pre-order, but you gave him one. That's all we had, the attendant replied. You'll need to take the chicken or pasta. I don't eat meat. Sir, lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers. The man's eyes flared, but he said nothing more. He took the tray with the chicken, set it down untouched. Ayanna felt her stomach tighten. Different faces, same story. She tapped out another note. 10:58 a.m. Passenger in 31C denied pre-ordered vegetarian meal. White passenger next to him received vegetarian meal without pre-order. Attendant, lower your voice. The man glanced back and caught Ayanna's eye for a moment. She gave him a small nod, a silent acknowledgement. I see you. I understand. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Ayanna pulled out her laptop and set it on the tray table. She opened a presentation, not the one for London, but a new document titled Aurora Airways Incident Report, line by line. She began laying out the sequence of events. Facts first, names, times, direct quotes, every detail that could withstand scrutiny in a boardroom or a courtroom. Her mind began to map the situation beyond the confines of the airplane. Aurora Airways was a flagship brand of AeroVista Group, a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise, and she, Dr. Ayanna Brooks, held just under 12% of AeroVista's total voting shares through Vanguard's investment arm. Enough to influence, enough to demand answers. The thought settled in her like a weight she was willing to carry. She had not wanted to play that card today, but perhaps they had forced her hand. A shadow fell across her tray table. She looked up to see Claire. the business class flight attendant who had overseen her removal. Claire's expression was tight, polite. "Dr. Brooks, we've arranged a seat for you back in business class," she said in a lower voice. "It's open now. We'd like to move you back up." Ayanna looked at her calmly. "That won't be necessary." Claire blinked. "Ma'am, it's the least we can do to—" "The situation is well beyond a seating change. Miss Whitman, I'll remain here. That way. There's no confusion about what happened today." Claire's smile faltered. She hesitated, then said, "Would you like anything to make your journey more comfortable?" "Yes. Documentation of your crew's actions this morning. Written statements from you and Mr. Kane, acknowledging what occurred before takeoff." Color rose in Claire's cheeks. "I'm not sure company policy allows," Ayanna interrupted gently. "Company policy also doesn't allow discriminatory treatment of passengers. Yet here we are." Claire drew in a breath as if to reply, then thought better of it. "I'll speak with Mr. Kane." She turned and walked briskly toward the galley. Ayanna exhaled slowly, aware of Naomi, the woman in the aisle seat beside her, watching with quiet interest. "You handled that with more patience than I would have," Naomi said finally. "It's not patience," Ayanna replied. "It's strategy." Naomi smiled faintly. "Well, strategy suits you." The rest of the cabin hummed with low conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from somewhere ahead. Preston Hale, she imagined, was sipping champagne in 2A, unaware of the corporate earthquake already building thousands of feet above the Atlantic. Ayanna closed her laptop, leaned back, and allowed her mind to move 3 steps ahead. By the time they landed in London, her team in Washington would have received her notes. By then, the board at Air Vista would have a copy as well. She glanced down the aisle toward the curtained doorway to business class. For now, she would let them think they had won. For now. The hum of the engine settled into a steady, low vibration. Ayanna kept her laptop closed now, sitting with her hands folded loosely in her lap, her eyes resting on the seat back ahead. She was thinking, but not in a way that showed. Her expression gave away nothing, yet every detail of the past 30 minutes played on a loop in her mind. Claire returned once, placing a small bottle of sparkling water on Ayanna's tray table, without a word. No apology, no acknowledgement of the earlier dismissal, just the quiet placement of a peace offering. Ayanna slid the bottle to the side and left it unopened. A soft voice drew her attention. Naomi leaned toward her slightly, lowering her tone, so the man on Ayanna's left could not overhear. "I've traveled a lot for work," Naomi said, "and I've seen things like this more times than I can count. It never sits right, but most people, they just let it pass." Ayanna met her gaze, and you, Naomi, hesitated. "Sometimes I speak up. Sometimes I don't. Depends on whether I think it will help or just make things worse." Ayanna nodded slowly. She understood. The calculus of confrontation was never simple, but the difference today was that she had tools, resources, and a platform most people did not. She could make it matter. Meal service began in the economy cabin about 45 minutes later. The cart rattled down the aisle, metal trays stacked in narrow slots. A young attendant stopped at their row, her tone clipped but polite enough. "Chicken or pasta?" Ayanna asked. "What are the ingredients in the pasta?" The attendant shrugged. "Some kind of tomato sauce." Naomi asked for pasta. Ayanna did the same. The tray landed on her table with a dull thud, the sauce already congealed under the plastic lid. As she peeled it back, a glob splattered onto the cuff of her sleeve, dark red against navy wool. "Oh, sorry," the attendant said, though her voice carried no weight. She handed Ayanna a single thin napkin before moving on. Naomi reached into her tote and pulled out a packet of tissues. "Here, that stain will set if you leave it." Ayanna dabbed at the fabric, feeling the warmth of irritation behind her ribs. "I am meeting with 50 investors tomorrow morning in this suit," she murmured. "That's awful," Naomi said. "You should complain." Ayanna's eyes softened, but her voice stayed cool. "I will, but not to customer service." The turbulence started about an hour later. The aircraft jolted sharply, seatbelt signs flashing on with a chime. Overhead bins rattled. A drink cart somewhere in the aisle banged against a seat. The captain's voice came over the intercom, instructing everyone to remain seated and belted. Ayanna watched Robert Kane move through the forward cabins, checking on certain passengers. She noticed a pattern instantly. He stopped at every white face in the front section, leaning in to offer reassurances, but passed by passengers of color without even making eye contact. She added another line to her growing report. 12, 12, P. Lead FA checked on white passengers during turbulence, bypassed passengers of color in same section. When the air smoothed and the signs went off, the hum of conversation returned. A few rows ahead, the black man from earlier was speaking to a different attendant, his voice edged with disbelief. "You had vegetarian meals all along. You just didn't give me one." The attendant's answer was low and defensive, but Ayanna caught fragments. "Not my fault. Not enough. You'll have to write to the airline." The man sat back, shaking his head. His white seatmate looked away, pretending to focus on his phone. Ayanna made another note. 6 separate incidents of disparate treatment, all within the same flight. And this was just what she could observe from her seat. By now, Naomi had seen her jotting down every detail. "You're building something," she said. Ayanna's voice was quiet, but sure. "I am." The hours stretched. Cabin lights dimmed. Ayanna closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think. The scene at the premium counter, the lounge, the boarding hesitation, the pre-departure drink that never arrived, the seat reassignment. Each one alone could be dismissed as an oversight. Together, they formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. Somewhere ahead, Preston Hale was likely enjoying a second or third glass of champagne, completely unaware of who exactly he had displaced. She almost smiled at the thought, not a smile of amusement, but of inevitability. The day would come, sooner than he imagined, when the balance would tip. The quiet was broken when Robert Kane appeared at their row. He crouched slightly, addressing Ayanna with an unfamiliar tone of careful respect. "Dr. Brooks," he said, "we've arranged a written apology from the crew for this morning's mix-up. We'd also like to extend a complimentary voucher for future travel." Ayanna looked at him steadily. "I will accept your apology when it's given, without the motivation of fear. As for the voucher, keep it. I didn't ask for a free flight. I asked for fairness." Robert's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Is there anything we can do to make your remaining flight more comfortable? You can ensure every passenger here receives the service they paid for," she said. "That would be a start." He straightened, gave a stiff nod, and moved away. Naomi glanced sideways. "You didn't raise your voice once. That's impressive." Ayanna's gaze drifted toward the curtained section that separated them from business class. "Raising my voice isn't the point. Making sure they hear me is." The minutes ticked by toward their crossing of the Atlantic. The aircraft felt quieter now, though Ayanna suspected it was just the weight of awareness settling over the crew. They knew. Word had spread. And while they didn't yet understand the scale of their mistake, they were starting to feel the edges of it. She opened her laptop one last time before the captain's call for electronics to be switched off. The incident report was now 6 pages long, complete with timestamps, names, and a summary of each event. She saved the file locally and on an encrypted drive, then closed the lid with a quiet click. Outside the window, the sun had shifted, casting the wing in pale gold. Ayanna stared at the light for a long moment, her face calm, her heartbeat steady. This was no longer about a single seat or a single passenger. It was about a culture that thought this was acceptable, a system that allowed it to happen without consequence. In the silence of row 34, Ayanna Brooks began to plan not just her next move, but the reckoning to come. The cabin was hushed now except for the low mechanical hum beneath the floor. Somewhere up ahead, the curtains to business class rustled as a flight attendant passed through, her steps muffled against the carpet. Ayanna watched, not for the attendant, but for the subtle rhythm of who was being served and who was being overlooked. It was a pattern she could not unsee. From her seat in row 34, she had a partial view of the forward galley when the curtain was left slightly open. A white passenger in the third row of economy waved casually, and within moments a flight attendant brought him an extra snack and a fresh cup of coffee. Moments later, Ayanna saw a woman of South Asian descent try the same, only to be told they had run out. Ayanna knew they had not. She had just seen a tray of snacks placed on the counter behind the galley partition. She tapped another note into her phone. Patterns like this were important. They showed consistency, not coincidence. Naomi leaned slightly toward her. "You're still writing, observing," Ayanna said softly. "Patterns speak louder than isolated moments." Naomi gave her a look of interest. "So you've done this before?" Ayanna's mouth curved slightly. "I've been in enough rooms where people pretend the truth is a misunderstanding. Documentation makes it harder to dismiss." She returned her gaze to the aisle just as a black couple, 3 rows ahead, tried to flag down a passing attendant for water. The attendant nodded vaguely, but continued down the aisle without stopping. 10 minutes later, Ayanna saw her hand a bottle to a white passenger 2 rows behind them. The tension under her calm surface tightened another notch. This was not the erratic behavior of one inattentive crew member. It was a pattern embedded in the way service was being distributed. Who was acknowledged promptly, who was made to wait, who was told no. Robert Kane emerged from the forward section again. He stopped beside a row where 2 white passengers were seated, crouched down to speak to them in hushed tones. Ayanna noticed the way his expression softened, how his body language shifted into easy friendliness. He moved on without so much as a glance toward the rows where the earlier complaints had come from. She wrote again. 146p, Mum. Multiple instances of preferential service based on race. Observed at least 4 separate interactions in past 30 minutes. The man in the aisle seat beside Naomi stood up to stretch. Ayanna took the opportunity to glance into the aisle more freely. She caught sight of Preston Hale in business class, half turned in his seat, gesturing animatedly to the person beside him. Even from here, she could recognize the relaxed entitlement in his posture. He looked utterly comfortable, untouched, unaware. She thought of the moment at boarding when he had walked up, confident that simply stating, "I always book this seat," was enough to displace her. She wondered how many times that assumption had gone unchallenged in his life. The seatbelt sign chimed on again as they entered another pocket of turbulence. Passengers settled back, securing drinks and devices. Ayanna kept her eyes forward, but her mind was in motion. She imagined the boardroom at Aerovista Group headquarters. She could picture Jonathan Reeves at the head of the table, frowning as the details unfolded. There was a high probability that word was already filtering upward. She checked her watch. London time would put Aerovista's leadership in mid-afternoon. That was prime window for strategic calls. If she sent the right message now, it would be in front of the right people before they even landed. Her phone buzzed softly with a notification. No signal for calls, but she could still receive certain encrypted texts from her executive team via the in-flight Wi-Fi. It was a simple message from her chief legal officer. "Ready when you are." She typed back a single word, "Soon." The cart rolled past again, this time with dessert for those in economy who had ordered special meals. Ayanna noticed the man from row 31, the one denied his vegetarian meal being skipped entirely. She glanced toward the cart and saw there was still dessert on it. She made another note. The repetition of these small inequities was as loud to her as any shouted insult. She thought of the investors she would meet in London, of the meticulous preparation she had done for that meeting. Here, in this cabin, none of that mattered. She was not seen as a person of accomplishment, only as someone they could move without consequence. Naomi had been quiet for a while, but now she spoke again. "Whatever you're planning, I hope it shakes them." Ayanna regarded her for a moment. "I'm not planning to shake them. I'm planning to restructure the ground they're standing on." Naomi's brows lifted slightly. "That sounds big." "It has to be," Ayanna replied. "Otherwise it will just happen to someone else next week." The turbulence eased and the seatbelt sign went off. Claire appeared from the front, walking quickly toward the back. She avoided Ayanna's gaze, but Ayanna caught the flicker of uncertainty in her face. The shift in their behavior had already begun. They were feeling the first hints of a current they did not yet understand. Ayanna closed her phone and folded her hands in her lap. She had what she needed for now. The next step would come soon enough. Through the small oval window, the endless gray blue of the Atlantic stretched beneath them. Somewhere far ahead was London, where meetings and headlines and board decisions waited. But here, in this cabin, the quiet work of observation continued. Ayanna did not need to raise her voice. She only needed to see clearly, and to ensure that what she saw could be proven. The truth was assembling itself line by line, timestamp by timestamp, in a file that would soon land in inboxes capable of ending careers. For now, she sat back, adjusted her seatbelt, and let the plane carry her forward. The curtain to business class swayed again, and this time Robert Kane stepped through with the deliberation of someone who had made a decision, but was not entirely sure it was the right one. He moved down the aisle slowly, scanning the rows, his gaze landing on Ayanna. She met his eyes without flinching. When he reached her row, he crouched slightly, the same way he had earlier. But there was a shift in his tone now. Not deference exactly, but caution. "Dr. Brooks," he began, "I wanted to follow up on our earlier conversation." Ayanna closed her laptop with a soft click. "Go ahead." "We take your concerns very seriously," he said. "I understand this morning's seat change caused you considerable inconvenience. I want to assure you there was no intention to—" "To what?" Ayanna's voice was calm, even gentle. "No intention to single me out. No intention to disregard the ticket I paid for. No intention to place me behind a curtain where I would be ignored for most of the flight." Robert's mouth opened, then closed. He shifted his weight. "We make operational decisions based on a variety of factors. Sometimes those decisions are imperfect. Imperfect is a computer glitch that assigns a duplicate seat." Ayanna replied, "What happened today was deliberate. Robert glanced at Naomi, then back at Ayanna. I'm prepared to file an internal report. I have already filed one, she said. His brows drew together slightly. You mean you've contacted customer relations in one? Anna said, leaning in just enough that her voice stayed low. I mean the Aero Vista Group Board of Directors. The words landed like a dropped weight. Robert's eyes flickered, searching her face for some sign she was bluffing. You've contacted the board. Not yet, Ayanna said, but they will have my report before this flight touches down in London. Robert's gaze darted toward the front of the plane, as if he could see through the bulkhead to the captain. You have a relationship with the board. Ayanna's expression did not change. I am the largest individual voting shareholder of Aero Vista Group outside of Jonathan Reeves himself. I have sat at that table for 6 years. The color drained slightly from Robert's face. I see. I don't think you do, Ayanna said. But you will. Behind him, Claire had emerged from the galley. She caught the end of Ayanna's words and froze. Her eyes moved between Robert and Ayanna, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. For a moment, the two crew members exchanged a glance not one of solidarity, but of shared apprehension. Naomi, seated beside Ayanna, kept her gaze fixed on the small paperback in her hands, but the corner of her mouth betrayed the faintest trace of a smile. Robert straightened slowly. If there's anything we can do to improve the remainder of your flight, you can start, Ayanna said, by offering the same level of service to every passenger in this cabin, regardless of skin color. Robert nodded once, curtly, and stepped back into the aisle. He walked toward the galley, Claire falling into step beside him. Their voices were low but tense. Naomi turned her head slightly. That was something that was necessary, Ayanna said. Sometimes you have to remind people where the real authority sits. It did not take long for the ripple to spread. Ayanna noticed the change almost immediately. The next time the drink cart came down the aisle, the attendant smiled at every passenger. The black couple, 3 rows ahead, were served promptly, their water bottles delivered without delay. The man in row 31 received a dessert plate at last. It was not sincerity. Ayanna knew. It was self-preservation. But for the moment, the result was the same. Half an hour later, Captain Lucas Warren himself appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with the steady demeanor of a man used to controlling situations. He approached Ayanna's row with an air of measured professionalism. Dr. Brooks, he said, inclining his head slightly, I understand there was an issue with your seating this morning. I want to apologize personally for any inconvenience. Ayanna looked up at him. Captain Warren, your crew made choices that were not about seating capacity or operational needs. They were about who they thought could be moved without consequence. The captain's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I will review the incident with my team. I'm sure you will, Ayanna said, and so will the Aero Vista board. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in his eyes. Not surprise this time, but recognition. He knew the name. He knew the weight it carried. Understood, he said quietly. If there's anything I can do personally to address your concerns, you can make sure this conversation is part of your final flight log, Ayanna said. Not a side note, not a casual mention, a formal entry. Captain Warren gave a slow nod. Yes, ma'am. As he walked away, Naomi leaned in. You've just lit a fuse. Fuses are only dangerous if you don't control the timing, Ayanna said. The rest of the cabin felt subtly different now. The attendants moved more deliberately, their eyes darting toward Ayana's row as if to gauge her reaction to every interaction. The other passengers seemed to sense something had shifted, though few knew exactly what. Ayana, for her part, was calm. She had not come here to cause a scene, but she had also not come to be erased. And now, the crew knew they were not dealing with an ordinary passenger. They were dealing with someone who could reach into their world and rearrange it from the top down. Through the narrow window, the first hints of land began to appear on the horizon, faint and green against the endless blue. London was coming into view. So was the next stage. Ayana reached for her laptop once more. There was one final section of the report she needed to write before touchdown, a section labeled Recommendations for Immediate Action. She began to type. The seatbelt sign had just flicked off again when Ayana's laptop chimed softly, a discreet signal that her secure connection to the Vanguard servers was active. She glanced at the clock on her screen. In London, it was approaching 4 p.m., right in the heart of the workday. Perfect timing. She pulled up the draft incident report, scanning it for clarity. 6 pages had grown to 9. Names, positions, timestamps, quotes, and a list of witnesses. The tone was factual, clinical even, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. It was the kind of document that could end careers without needing a single raised voice. Naomi noticed her typing. "You're sending it now." "Not yet," Ayana said. "There's one more piece I want to add." She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the low murmur of conversation around the cabin. The shift was tangible. Where earlier there had been a casual neglect in the crew's manner, now there was a stiffness, an awareness that every move might be watched. Passengers of color were suddenly receiving faster service, warmer smiles. The change was as telling as the original behavior. Fear had a way of revealing truth. From her peripheral vision, she saw Preston Hale stand in the aisle near the front of business class, stretching and speaking to a crew member with a grin that was just a bit too self-satisfied. He had no idea what was unfolding behind him. She wondered how long it would take for his expression to change when the calls started coming in. The intercom clicked on. Captain Warren's voice was calm but measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received updated weather information for our arrival into Heathrow. There may be a brief delay in landing clearance, but we expect to be at the gate within the hour. We appreciate your patience." Ayana smiled faintly. She appreciated the captain's composure, but she could feel the undercurrent in his tone. He knew a conversation was waiting for him on the ground, one that would not be easy to navigate. Robert Kane passed through the cabin again, checking seat belts and offering polite, almost deferential nods to passengers. When he reached Ayana's row, he slowed. "Dr. Brooks," he said quietly, "I've spoken to my crew. I believe we've addressed some of the concerns." "You've adjusted behavior," Ayana said. "Addressing the cause will take more than a few hours." Robert hesitated. "May I ask, what happens next?" Ayana met his eyes. "That depends on whether the company chooses to acknowledge the problem or conceal it. I'm giving them the opportunity to do the former. And if they don't, then the board will." His lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded once and moved on. Naomi exhaled softly beside her. "You've got him rattled." "He should be," Ayana said. "Not because of me, but because of the system he's upholding." The plane began its gradual descent, the engines shifting pitch. Ayana reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather folder. Inside was a single printed page, her shareholding summary in Aerovista Group. It was a document she rarely carried physically, but in her experience, Paper sometimes carried a presence that digital files could not. She laid it on her tray table, reading the lines she already knew by heart. 12%. Enough to be a voice no one could afford to ignore. Enough to call an emergency session if needed. Naomi glanced at the page, her brow furrowing. "Is that—" "Yes," Ayanna said simply. "You're not just a passenger." "No," Ayanna said, her gaze steady on the paper. "I am part of the company's ownership, and with that comes responsibility." The overhead lights brightened slightly as the crew prepared for landing. Ayanna reopened her laptop, attached the incident report to an encrypted message, and typed in a short directive. For immediate review by the executive committee. Discussion required before close of business today. She addressed it to Jonathan Reeves and copied in the legal and compliance chairs. Her finger hovered over the send key for a moment. Timing was everything. She would wait until they were on the ground, until the crew was still in uniform and accountable. The landing gear deployed with a muted thump, and the city of London slid into view beneath the clouds. Rows of terraced houses, ribbons of road, the silver curve of the Thames. Ayanna felt the familiar mix of anticipation and calculation she always did before an important meeting. The wheels touched down with a shudder, the roar of reverse thrust filling the cabin. As they taxied to the gate, Preston Hale was laughing with a colleague, completely unaware that the next few hours would mark a shift in the trajectory of his comfortable world. When the plane came to a stop and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Robert Kane stood at the front, making the standard disembarkation announcements. His voice was steady, but Ayanna caught the faintest edge in it, the sound of someone acutely aware of who was watching. Ayanna gathered her things calmly, slipping the leather folder back into her bag. Naomi touched her arm. "I hope you burn it down," Naomi said quietly. "I hope I rebuild it better," Ayanna replied. As the aisle began to fill with passengers retrieving their bags, Ayanna stayed seated. She waited until the business class passengers had cleared, until Preston Hale had walked past without so much as a glance in her direction. Only then did she stand, stepping into the aisle with an unhurried grace. Robert was waiting near the exit door, Claire a few steps behind. Ayanna met both of their gazes. "I'll see you again," she said softly. Neither responded. She stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool air of Heathrow brushing her face. In the quiet moment before she joined the stream of passengers, she pulled out her phone, connected to the terminal Wi-Fi, and pressed send. Somewhere in the corporate offices of AeroVista Group, an email was arriving that would change the course of more than one career, and Ayanna Brooks was already thinking about the meeting to come. The sleek black sedan pulled away from Heathrow's Terminal 5, its tinted windows reflecting the fading afternoon light. Ayanna sat in the back, her laptop open on her knees, scanning her inbox. The subject line she had been expecting was already there. Executive Committee Emergency Session, 5 p.m. GMT. She checked her watch. 40 minutes until the meeting. Enough time to get to AeroVista Group's London headquarters. Enough time to decide exactly how much to reveal. Naomi had slipped into a taxi outside the terminal, offering one last nod and a quiet, "Go get them." Ayanna had simply smiled. There was no need for more words. The ride into the city moved quickly, the driver cutting through late afternoon traffic with practiced efficiency. Ayanna used the time to review the faces of the executive committee, their histories, their alliances. Jonathan Reeves at the head measured, strategic, but fiercely protective of the brand. 3 long-standing board members who prided themselves on stability. 2 newer additions, eager to make their mark. And, of course, the operations chief, a man whose career had been built on keeping conflict out of public view. When the car pulled up to the Aerovista Tower, Ayanna stepped out into the cool air, adjusting the cuff of her blazer. Inside, the lobby was all glass and marble, polished to a mirror sheen. The receptionist looked up, her eyes widening slightly before she composed herself. "Dr. Brooks," she said, "they're waiting for you on the 22nd floor." Ayanna took the elevator up, the soft hum of the motor the only sound. As the doors slid open, the receptionist outside the boardroom gestured her in. Inside, the long table gleamed under recessed lighting. Jonathan Reeves was already seated at the head, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expression neutral but watchful. Around the table, the others shifted slightly in their seats as she entered. "Dr. Brooks," Jonathan said, his voice calm. "We received your report. I trust you read it," Ayanna replied, taking a seat midway down the table. Jonathan tapped the folder in front of him. "Every word. And I think you know the gravity of what you've presented." "I do," Ayanna said. "And I also know this is not an isolated incident. The report I sent reflects only one flight, but the pattern runs deeper. I've seen enough evidence, even before today, to believe systemic bias is baked into our customer service culture." One of the longer-serving board members, Margaret Cole, leaned forward. "Dr. Brooks, accusations like that carry consequences. We have to consider the public reaction." "That's exactly why I am here," Ayanna said evenly. "Because the public will react. This will not stay quiet. The difference is whether we act now or wait until we are forced to react." Another voice cut in, Victor Hensley. "The operations chief. With respect, we cannot base sweeping policy changes on a single passenger's perspective." Ayanna met his gaze steadily. "When that passenger owns 12% of the company, you can—" A faint ripple moved around the table. Jonathan's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile, though his eyes stayed sharp. "You have a proposal, I assume," he said. "Yes," Ayanna replied. She tapped her laptop, sending a document to the central screen on the wall. 3 immediate actions. 1. An independent audit of all in-flight service practices, including demographic analysis of customer complaints. 2. Mandatory bias and equity training for all customer-facing staff, with completion tied to performance reviews. 3. A public commitment from Aerovista leadership to implement findings transparently. Margaret's lips pressed together. "That will not be inexpensive." Ayanna turned to her. "Neither is a class action lawsuit. Neither is a brand collapse. And neither is rebuilding trust once it is gone." Victor's jaw tightened. "Do you expect us to discipline an entire crew based solely on your word?" "No," Ayanna said. "I expect you to discipline them based on documented fact. Every incident I described has at least one witness. Some have several. And I can provide contact details for passengers who are willing to speak on record." Jonathan leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. "And if we don't move forward with your proposal," Ayanna's voice was calm, almost quiet, "then I will call a shareholder vote to remove leadership who refuses to address a clear and present liability to this company's reputation and ethics." The room was silent for a long moment. The weight of her words settled over the table like a drawn curtain. Jonathan broke the silence. "I think we understand your position, Dr. Brooks. The committee will deliberate immediately." Ayanna closed her laptop and stood. "Do that. I will be in my office until you have an answer." As she walked toward the door, she caught Victor muttering something to Margaret, his tone low and irritated. She did not slow her pace. She had planted the fuse. Whether they liked it or not, it was lit. Outside the boardroom, the receptionist gave her a quick, curious glance. "How did it go?" Ayanna offered the faintest of smiles. "It's going." She stepped into her private office down the hall, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline. Her assistant, Elise, was already there, holding a folder. "These are the media contacts you requested," Elise said quietly. "Thank you," Ayanna said, setting the folder on her desk. She had not yet decided whether to use them, but it was always wise to be ready. From her window, she could see the Thames glinting in the late light. Somewhere out there, the passengers from Flight 482 were telling their stories to friends, to colleagues, maybe even to journalists. And somewhere in the building behind her, the Aerovista Executive Committee was deciding whether to protect their own comfort or the company's future. Ayanna knew which choice she would make. She only wondered if they had the courage to match it. The air in Ayanna's office was cool, quiet, and deceptively still. She sat behind her desk, fingertips resting lightly on the leather folder Elise had handed her. The list inside was more than names and numbers. It was a map of influence. Each contact a door that could be opened at exactly the right time. The phone on her desk buzzed softly. Elise's voice came through the intercom. "Jonathan Reeves wants to see you in the boardroom again." Ayanna's gaze flicked toward the clock. Barely 20 minutes since she had left them to deliberate. That was faster than she expected. She stood, straightened her jacket, and walked back down the hall. When she entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was tighter. Jonathan sat with his elbows on the table, hands clasped, eyes steady on her. Margaret Cole looked as if she had been chewing on a lemon. Victor Hensley's jaw was clenched, his knuckles pale against the arm of his chair. "Dr. Brooks," Jonathan began, "the committee has reviewed your report and your recommendations. We are prepared to move forward with 2 of your 3 proposals immediately. The independent audit will begin within the week, and bias training will be mandatory starting next quarter." "And the third?" Ayanna asked. Jonathan's mouth thinned. "We are not prepared to make a public statement until after the audit is complete." Ayanna let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. "That is not acceptable." Victor leaned forward. "With respect, public statements carry legal implications. We cannot admit to systemic bias without verifiable data." Ayanna's tone stayed level. "You already have verifiable data. Today's incident is only the most recent. You are choosing to wait not for proof, but for cover." Margaret's voice was sharper than before. "This company has survived difficult press before. We do not need to create more." Ayanna met her gaze. "You're right. You do not need to create more. But you will not prevent it by pretending nothing happened. The passengers on that flight are already telling their stories. Some of them have platforms. All of them have phones. You are already in the press cycle, whether you want to be or not." Jonathan's expression shifted just slightly. He knew she was right. Ayanna placed the leather folder on the table and slid it toward him. "In here are the media contacts I was prepared to share with you. Journalists I trust, who report with accuracy and depth. You can work with them now, on our terms, or you can face them later, when the story has already been shaped without us." Jonathan rested his hand on the folder but did not open it. "You're putting us in a difficult position." "No," Ayanna said. "I am giving you a choice. That is leverage, not pressure. The pressure will come when the world realizes you knew and did nothing." Victor shifted in his seat. "You are threatening your own company. I am protecting it," Ayanna replied. "And unlike some of you, I am willing to take the risk required to do that." The room went quiet again. Jonathan glanced toward Margaret, then back at Ayanna. "Give us until tomorrow morning to decide on the public statement." "You have until 8, Ayanna said. "After that, I will make my own statement." She turned and walked out without waiting for a response. Back in her office, Elise was watching her closely. "They're not happy. They're not supposed to be," Ayanna said. "Comfort is the enemy of change." She sat, opened her laptop, and began drafting 2 versions of a press release, one in the company's name, one in her own. Both told the truth. Both made it clear that what happened on Flight 482 was unacceptable. The difference was whether Aerovista Group would be standing beside her when it was said aloud. Her phone lit up with an incoming message from Naomi. "How's the fight going?" Ayanna typed back. "They're stalling. I'm not." The sun was low now, casting a gold haze across the skyline. Ayanna paused, letting the warmth touch her face through the glass. She thought of the man in row 31, the black couple, 3 rows ahead, Naomi beside her in economy. Small moments, small injustices, each one invisible to those who did not want to see. She had the resources, the reach, and the resolve to force the world to look. But leverage was not just about power. It was about timing. Too soon, and they would close ranks. Too late, and the story would pass her by. At 6:42 p.m. She sent a brief message to one of the journalists on her list. Sophie Langford, known for her coverage of corporate ethics and civil rights. "Dinner tonight. Confidential. My driver will pick you up." The reply came within 3 minutes. "Name the place." Ayanna chose a quiet restaurant with private booths, the kind where conversation stayed between those at the table. She arrived early, reviewing her notes as she waited. When Sophie walked in, she carried herself with the confident ease of someone who knew the value of listening. They ordered tea, and Sophie leaned in. "What's going on?" Anna did not waste time. She outlined the events of the flight, the crew's behavior, the board's partial concessions, and their refusal to act publicly. She did not embellish, but she also did not soften. Sophie's pen moved quickly across her notepad. "You're prepared to go public if they do not act by morning," Ayanna said. "And I will have documentation and witnesses ready." Sophie nodded slowly. "If this comes from you, it will be big. If it comes from inside the company, it will be seismic." "That is the point," Ayanna said. They spoke for another hour, agreeing on the framework of the story and the safeguards for witnesses. By the time Ayanna's driver pulled up outside, she knew the next move was set. In the car, she stared out at the passing lights of the city. Leverage was not about loud moves. It was about placing weight exactly where it would tip the balance. By morning, she would know whether she had to use it. And if she did, the shift would be felt all the way back to the aisles of Flight 482. London was quieter than Ayanna expected when she stepped out of the car in front of her hotel. The night air carried the scent of rain, the kind that softened the edges of neon lights and blurred the reflections on the pavement. Inside the lobby, the hum of conversation was low, muted, as if the building itself understood her mood. Her suite overlooked the Thames. She placed her bag on the desk, loosened her blazer, and stood by the window. Across the water, the lights of the city pulsed against the dark sky. Somewhere, behind closed doors, Aerovista's board members were weighing the cost of admitting fault against the risk of silence. She could almost hear the clock ticking. Ayanna opened her laptop. 2 drafts waited on her desktop. One was a company statement, polished, professional, and careful, offering a public commitment to equity and an acknowledgment of the incident on Flight 482. The other bore her name alone, sharper, more direct, and impossible to misinterpret. She clicked open the second file, rereading the opening lines. I was removed from my seat in business class to accommodate a white passenger. I have spent my career building companies that solve hard problems. This, however, is not a problem that requires innovation. It requires honesty. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. This was the nuclear option. She had never used her public voice to call out her own company before. Doing so would send a shockwave through the industry. The phone rang, breaking the stillness. It was Naomi. "You sound like you're still in the fight," Naomi said without preamble. "I am," Ayanna replied. "Then promise me you'll sleep tonight. You need your head clear in the morning." Ayanna smiled faintly. "I will try." They talked for a few more minutes, Naomi sharing updates from friends who had been on the flight. 2 had already posted on social media. One video, showing Ayanna being asked to move, had been shared nearly 5,000 times. It was blurry, but the audio was clear enough. Claire Whitman's voice could be heard asking for her boarding pass again, even though Ayanna had already shown it. When the call ended, Ayanna felt the weight in her chest grow heavier. The story was already moving without her. That could be good or dangerous. She set her phone down and began pacing the length of the suite. The city outside seemed restless, like it was holding its breath. She thought of her father, who had worked as a postal clerk for 30 years. He used to say, "Sometimes you have to decide if you want peace or progress. You rarely get both at the same time." Tonight, she knew what she wanted. At 11 p.m. She received an email from Elise. No decision yet. Reeves is still in meetings. That meant they were split. If Jonathan Reeves had the votes, she would already have her answer. Ayanna sat back down at the desk. She opened her contacts, hovering over Sophie Langford's name. One call could set the morning in motion, with or without the board's approval. She could almost hear Sophie's voice. "If you want this to land, we need the morning cycle." Her hand curled into a fist. The temptation to act now was strong, but she knew the board well enough to understand they might be counting on her to overplay her hand. If she moved first, they could frame it as a rogue shareholder, not a systemic problem. Midnight came and went. She made tea, the steam curling into the cool air. Each sip anchored her, pulling her back from the edge of impulsive action. She sat again, this time on the sofa, and let her thoughts drift to the passengers on that plane. The man in 31A, eyes fixed on the floor as if willing himself invisible. The couple who held hands a little tighter after she was moved. Naomi's steady, quiet support. This was not just about her. That was the thought that steadied her pulse. At 2A, she finally lay down, setting an alarm for 6. The city outside had gone still, but her mind was sharp with unfinished conversations and strategies. When the alarm buzzed, she rose immediately. The sky was pale with the first light of dawn. She showered, dressed, and sat once more at the desk. The clock read 7:15 a.m. She opened her inbox. Still nothing from the board. She typed a brief message to Elise. "Any word?" The reply came a minute later. "Reeves says they will deliver their decision by 7:50. It was cutting it close. Too close. The minutes dragged. She found herself tapping her pen against the desk, a habit she had broken years ago. The city was fully awake now. traffic already thick along the bridges. At 7:47, her phone lit up with a message from Jonathan Reeves himself. "We will issue the public statement today. Draft coming your way for review." She exhaled, a slow, deliberate breath. Victory, but not complete. She had forced their hand, but the wording would matter. The draft arrived at 7:55. She read it twice. It was better than she expected, an acknowledgement of bias, a promise of transparency, and a commitment to act. She made 3 small edits, softening one phrase, sharpening another, adding a line that made the promise impossible to water down. At 8:02, the statement went to the communications department. Within minutes, it was live on the company's channels. Ayanna watched the first wave of responses appear: cautious praise from some, pointed skepticism from others. The real test would be in what happened next. She closed her laptop and poured herself another cup of tea. The countdown was over, but the campaign was just beginning. Somewhere in the Aerovista offices, Victor Hensley was likely fuming. Margaret Cole would be drafting her talking points. And Jonathan Reeves, she suspected, was already calculating how to turn this into a demonstration of leadership rather than capitulation. Ayanna was fine with that. Let them spin it however they needed, as long as the actions followed. Because now, the eyes of the public were on them. She turned back to the window, the morning light spilling across the Thames. Her father's words came to her again: peace or progress. Today, she had chosen progress, and she had no intention of stopping there. By mid-morning, the statement from Aerovista Group was everywhere. News sites carried it on their front pages. Business channels debated whether the move was courageous or simply damage control. Social media feeds churned with screenshots, reposts, and long threads from people who had their own stories to tell. Ayanna sat at the small dining table in her hotel suite, her laptop open, her tea growing cold. Notifications lit her phone every few seconds. She ignored most of them, focusing instead on the email chains between the communications department and the executive committee. They were scrambling to manage the narrative, to get ahead of a story that had already leapt out of their hands. On Twitter, a woman named Marcia Boyd had posted a video from a flight she had taken last year. The clip showed a black man in first class being told his seat was needed for an upgrade. The look on his face was one Ayanna recognized: confusion turning to resignation. Marcia's post ended with a sharp line: "This is not new. This is culture." The video had been viewed over 100,000 times in just 3 hours. Elise called from the office. "We're getting requests for comment from every major outlet. Jonathan wants to know if you'll do a joint interview with him." Ayanna's brow furrowed. "On camera." "Yes," Elise said. "He thinks it will signal unity, or it will signal that I have been absorbed into their version of the story." Ayanna replied, "Tell him I will consider it after I see the full plan for implementation." She ended the call and stood, pacing slowly. The statement had been a first step, but it was only that. Without follow-through, it would fade into the background noise of corporate apologies. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Sophie Langford. "You're trending. People are calling you the CEO who forced a giant to blink." "Are you ready for the second wave?" Ayanna typed back. "I was born ready." But they are not. She knew Sophie would understand what that meant. The second wave was not the initial burst of outrage. It was the steady, relentless drip of personal accounts, media investigations, and advocacy group reports that could stretch on for months. If Aerovista did not handle it well, they could face not only public condemnation, but legal scrutiny. By noon, advocacy organizations were releasing statements of support. One civil rights group announced they were compiling a database of similar incidents across the airline industry. Ayanna recognized the opportunity. She emailed the director of the group, offering to connect them with her own research team at Vanguard Cyber Systems. At the same time, she knew internal resistance was already building. Inside AeroVista's leadership ranks, there were those who saw her as a disruptor, someone who had made the company vulnerable. She had overheard enough in the past to know that some executives equated stability with inaction. Sure enough, her phone rang again. It was Margaret Cole. "Ayanna, I hope you understand the kind of strain this puts on our internal relationships," Margaret began. Her tone clipped but polite. "I understand it perfectly," Ayanna said. "We have loyal staff who feel their integrity is being questioned. Morale could suffer." Ayanna's reply was measured. "If their integrity is intact, the audit will confirm it. If not, morale is not the problem." Margaret's pause was brief, but telling. "You have a way of making things sound simple." "They are simple," Ayanna said. "They are just not easy." After the call ended, she sat for a moment, staring at the city beyond her window. The backlash from within the company would not be immediate or public, but it would come. The question was whether she could outpace it with change that could not be reversed. In the afternoon, she accepted an interview request from a respected public radio program. They connected her by audio from her hotel suite. The host asked why she had chosen to push for a public statement rather than handling the matter internally. "Because sunlight is the best disinfectant," Ayanna said. "The public has a right to know how the companies they trust are operating, and the employees have a right to work in a culture that does not tolerate bias, intentional or otherwise." The host asked if she trusted AeroVista's leadership to follow through. "I trust the public to hold us accountable," Ayanna said, "and I will be right there with them." The interview aired within the hour, and the quotes began circulating online almost immediately. Some praised her clarity. Others accused her of undermining her own company. She expected both reactions. They meant the conversation was alive. That evening, Jonathan Reeves called her directly. "You are making it difficult for me to hold this together," he said. "Good," Ayanna replied. "It is not supposed to be easy. You think the board will keep supporting you if this keeps escalating?" "I think they will have no choice," Ayanna said, "because by the time they realize the scope of this, it will be more costly to remove me than to work with me." There was a long pause on the line. Then Jonathan said, "We meet again tomorrow. Be prepared to discuss your role in overseeing the audit." When the call ended, Ayanna allowed herself a brief moment of stillness. The tide was moving fast now. The fallout was no longer a storm on the horizon. It was the water already at their feet. She stood at the window as the city lights came alive, the reflection of her own face staring back at her in the glass. She thought of the passengers still sending her messages, of the growing network of allies she was building without even setting foot in the AeroVista offices today. This was the point where most people would start to step back, to soften their stance in the name of cooperation. But Ayanna was not most people. She would keep pressing until change was not just promised, but delivered. And if that meant becoming the lightning rod that drew every bolt, she was ready. The boardroom was full when Ayanna arrived the next morning. The long glass table gleamed under the recessed lighting. Jonathan Reeves sat at the head, his hands folded neatly, eyes following her as she walked to her seat. Margaret Cole's expression was tight, her lips pressed into a straight line. Victor Hensley looked like he had not slept. A projector hummed softly, casting an image onto the wall. At first glance, it looked like a spreadsheet rows of flight numbers, dates, and passenger classifications. But the color coding told another story. Jonathan gestured toward the display. Dr. Brooks, as of today, you are officially tasked with overseeing the independent audit. What you are looking at now is a preliminary sample from the investigative team. Ayana's eyes moved across the data. Patterns emerged instantly. On certain high-capacity routes, passengers of color were moved from premium seating at rates far above their representation on the passenger list. The numbers were not subtle. This is systemic, Ayana said quietly. Victor shifted in his seat. The data sample is small. We cannot jump to conclusions. Ayana turned to him. You do not need a full ocean to know the water is salty. This is a pattern, and it is not by chance. Margaret leaned forward. We should be cautious about language until the investigation is complete. Words like systemic carry legal weight. Ayana met her gaze without blinking. Then it is a weight you will have to carry, because that is exactly what this is. The room fell silent for a moment. Jonathan broke it by clearing his throat. The question now is how we proceed. We have two options. We can work internally to correct this, keeping the findings confidential until we have measurable improvement. Or we can go public now, with the data we have, and take the reputational hit up front. Ayana leaned back, folding her arms. If you keep this quiet, it will leak. When it does, it will not be your carefully crafted narrative. It will be someone else's. And it will be worse. Victor's voice was tense. And if we go public now, the lawsuits will begin immediately. Ayana glanced back at the projection. The lawsuits will come either way. The difference is whether you are dragged into them or you walk in through the front door and admit your part. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing the shape of her words. You are advocating for full transparency. I am advocating for survival through honesty, Ayana said. This company has the resources to fix the problem. What it cannot survive is the perception that it refuses to. The meeting continued for another hour, but the tension was no longer subtle. Ayana could feel the undercurrent of resistance. Some of them feared the public fallout more than the injustice itself. That, she realized, was the true battle. When the meeting adjourned, Jonathan asked her to stay behind. The others filed out, leaving the two of them in the echoing space. You know, he said quietly, if you push this too far, you might not have a seat at this table when it is over. Ayana regarded him for a moment. Then I will build another table, but I will not sit quietly at one that is rotting. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. The choice will be put to a vote tomorrow. I suggest you spend today preparing your case. Outside the boardroom, Elise was waiting with a folder in her hand. This just came from the investigative team. You will want to see it. Inside were transcripts of crew interviews from several flights. Some attendants described being told by supervisors to reassign certain passengers when VIP upgrades became available. Many bien ho. The language was careful, but the implication was obvious. One even admitted off the record that management doesn't like making premium customers uncomfortable. Premium, Ayana thought, was code. She spent the afternoon combing through the material, highlighting key passages, and cross-referencing them with the passenger demographics. Every page made her jaw tighten. At one point, she paused and leaned back in her chair. This was the moment she had been building toward, but it carried a weight she could feel in her bones. If she took the evidence public, the company would be forced into immediate, sweeping action. But it would also trigger a storm so fierce that even her position might not protect her from being swept away. She thought of Naomi's voice on the phone, telling her to keep her head clear. She thought of the man in row 31, the couple holding hands, the faces of people who would never know that someone had fought for them in a boardroom thousands of miles away. By evening, she had outlined her presentation for the vote. It was clear, uncompromising, and backed by numbers no one could dismiss. She also had a sealed envelope containing a press-ready summary of the findings' insurance, in case the board tried to bury the truth. At dinner in a quiet corner of a hotel restaurant, she met Sophie Langford again. Sophie listened carefully as Ayanna described the internal struggle and the possibility of a split vote. "If they vote against transparency," Sophie said, "what will you do?" Ayanna sipped her water. "Then I will make sure the world knows what they voted against." Sophie's eyes held hers for a moment before she nodded. "Then I will make sure it is heard. Back in her suite." Ayanna stood at the window, the Thames dark under the city lights. She felt the pull of fatigue, but her mind was a live wire. Tomorrow was the turning point. She knew it the way a sailor knows when the wind is about to shift. Some storms you avoid. Some storms you steer into because they are the only way to reach where you are meant to go. Tomorrow, she would steer straight into it. The boardroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was just Ayanna's nerves sharpening her senses. Sunlight spilled in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The table was already full when she walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Jonathan Reeves gestured toward the empty seat beside him. She placed her folder on the table and sat down. Her pulse was steady, but her mind was alive with every possible outcome. This was it. One vote, one decision, and the future of the company's credibility would tilt one way or the other. Jonathan began the meeting without preamble. "We are here to determine our course of action regarding the findings of the preliminary audit. Dr. Brooks, you have the floor." Ayanna rose, carrying her folder to the front of the room. She stood in the narrow beam of sunlight that cut across the glass wall and began. "This is not about one flight. It is not about one passenger. It is about a pattern that speaks to the culture we have allowed to take root," she said. She clicked the remote in her hand. The projector came alive, displaying charts and graphs that told a story no one in the room could deny. She walked them through the numbers, each one building on the last. High-value routes, disproportionate seat reassignments, vague instructions from supervisors that somehow always led to the same result. She read aloud from crew transcripts, her voice steady. When asked to clarify the reason for reassignments, one supervisor stated, "Premium seating must meet the expectations of our most loyal customers. In practice, this has meant removing passengers of color far more often than their proportion in premium cabins." Some board members shifted in their seats. Margaret Cole's jaw tightened. Victor Hensley avoided her eyes. "This is systemic bias," Ayanna continued. "It is measurable. It is documented. And if we do not address it with transparency, it will define us before we have the chance to redefine ourselves." She set the remote down and looked each member in the eye. "I am not asking for an easy decision. I am asking for the right one. Vote to make this public. Vote to fix it. Vote to prove that we are more than the sum of our worst habits." When she finished, there was silence. Jonathan nodded once. "Thank you. Dr. Brooks, we will proceed to the vote." The board secretary passed out small slips of paper. One by one, each member wrote their choice. The slips were collected and placed in a plain wooden box. The air in the room felt heavier with each passing second. Ayanna's eyes drifted to the windows, to the distant skyline. She thought of Naomi back in the States, probably refreshing the news every few minutes. She thought of the passengers who had sent her messages, trusting her to be their voice. The secretary opened the box and began reading aloud. For transparency, for transparency. Against, for, against. Her stomach tightened with every word. The count was close, too close. Finally, the last slip was read. For transparency. Jonathan exhaled audibly. The motion passes. 7-5. Ayanna felt the weight in her chest lift just enough to let in a full breath. She sat back down, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. Jonathan straightened in his chair. The public statement will be prepared today and released by tomorrow morning. Dr. Brooks will oversee the implementation of the reforms and the completion of the full audit. Margaret Cole's voice was cool but restrained. We will support this course of action, though I reserve my concerns about potential fallout. Ayanna met her gaze. Fallout is survivable. Injustice is not. The meeting adjourned, but Jonathan caught up to her in the hallway. You won today, he said, but the fight is just starting. I know, she replied. That is why I came. Back in her hotel suite, she called Naomi. We did it, Ayanna said. Naomi laughed softly. Of course you did. Now tell me the part where you celebrated. Ayanna glanced out the window at the silver ribbon of the Thames. Not yet. There is still too much to do. That evening, she drafted the outline for the public announcement. It would be clear, concise, and impossible to water down. No euphemisms, no vague promises. The statement would detail the findings, the steps being taken, and the timeline for change. She sent it to Jonathan with a note. If this is going out under my watch, it will mean something. By morning, the press release was live. Headlines lit up across media platforms. Advocacy groups praised the decision. Former passengers flooded social media with their stories, both of discrimination and of hope that change might finally come. Ayanna watched the coverage quietly. She knew the next weeks would be the real test. But for now, the truth was out, and the first step toward accountability had been taken. 2 days later, she boarded another flight, this time to return home. As she walked down the jet bridge, a flight attendant at the door smiled and said, Welcome aboard. Dr. Brooks, we are honored to have you. Ayanna returned the smile, feeling the weight of the moment. It was a small gesture, but it mattered. She settled into her seat, looking out the window as the engines hummed to life. The sky stretched wide beyond the glass, open and waiting, somewhere deep inside. She knew this fight was far from over, but she also knew she was exactly where she needed to be. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe easily. Some battles are fought with raised voices. Others are won in silence with evidence, persistence, and a refusal to look away. Dr. Death. Ayanna Brooks never set out to be a headline. She only wanted what she had earned. But when injustice tried to shrink her space, she expanded the fight to include everyone who had been told, in one way or another, you do not belong. The policies of Aerovista Group will never be the same. Neither will the lives of the passengers who will now walk onto planes without fear of being quietly pushed aside. And yet, the story is bigger than one company. It is a reminder that discrimination, subtle or blatant, survives when good people stay silent. It is an invitation to notice, to speak, and to act. If this story moved you, let it live beyond the screen. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let your voice add to the change. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of quiet courage and undeniable justice. Because somewhere, right now, someone else is being told they do not belong. And together, we can make sure they are wrong.